Hi everyone, this video regards writing up quantitative findings. And I'm going to go over two examples. One is a published paper that you all have mostly seen, and the other is an evaluation report. And so there's slightly different ways of writing up findings, each of which is legitimate in your dissertation or your pilot study. Okay, so this is the first one I want to talk about. This is a paper that my team and I published, or a couple of folks and I published a while back, 2019. That's mixed methods. And I've used this as an example for a lot of different things, but I want to talk a little bit about how the findings are written in the quantitative piece, okay? So, here you can see results, that's the findings. I'm gonna change so I can highlight things. And the first research question is, to what extent do teachers enact targeted classroom practices after engaging in the PD? So I'm using a self-reported survey to talk about the extent to which they enact, and it's a pre-post, all right? Notice that I'm using the research question to frame this piece of findings. Many people find that it's useful to import your research question down to the findings or the results, they can be called either one, in order to make sure that you've answered them. And if you cannot answer them, it's important that you change the research question, right? Everything needs to be in alignment. So so I have actually changed research questions as I've gone along sometimes. Now, I've started answering this question. Results from the pre and post survey demonstrated that on average, teachers reported significant and substantive shifts in their practice. Okay, that sentence just sums up a whole bunch of data. First of all, I say on average, because it's not that every single teacher reported, but on average, they reported shifts. Another thing to keep in mind is that you don't use the word significant unless you have done a test for significance. So it's a very particular word in research articles if you're doing quantitative research. The word substantive, on the other hand, is more of a qualitative word, and I'm using that to say that it was a lot, right? So it's not just significant, it was a lot, right? Then I say t-tests of the difference pre to post showed significant differences for all subscales except traditional instruction, table 5. Now, scrolling down to table 5, I want you to see kind of how to display data. This is something easily that you could do with your data if you have a pre to post or if you're comparing two groups, right? So if you wanted to do a t-test. So here's the names, oops. I have it on the left side are the names of the constructs, all right? And then there's the mean pre, and then notice I have the standard deviation here. And then there's the mean of the post and the standard deviation because people want to see that. And then the t-statistic, and then of course there's a star if it's significant, all right? So if you end up running a t-test, this is a good kind of table or a way to portray it. Now, going back to my little paragraph. So notice that it's in the table, but I don't just let the table speak for itself. I also summarize the table in the text. I say, although teachers initially rated themselves lowest, so now I unpack a few things that I think are important. This is where the interpretation comes in. Although teachers initially rated themselves lowest on stewardship integration, data collection and analysis, and reasoning, explanation, argumentation, so those are 3 constructs. These subscales also exhibited the greatest gains, all right? So I'm telling folks, I want you to notice that these areas both started low and exhibited great gains. And I gave them some data in parentheses, and this is a common practice where you say, okay, I'm gonna give you evidence of how this resulted in gains. That there was a change of 0.91 standard deviations, 0.75 standard deviations, and 0.96 standard deviations. That's a common thing. You could also just use points. There was a change in, 1 point on the Likert scale or 0.7 on the Likert scale. Then I call out another thing going on. So I call out this change gains, and then I call it a second thing, which is that the lack of change in traditional instruction is consistent with the fact that we did not target that. All right. Now, so I've got two explanations going on here, the things I want to call people's attention to. And the evidence is really in these tables, right? So if people need the evidence, they could see mean, pre to post, they could see this T statistic, but they also can see evidence in this figure right here, where I show, you can see here the points that I was making in the paragraph, that stewardship integration, data collection analysis, and reasoning, explanation, and argumentation started out the lowest, but that they changed the most over time. And you can see here where they changed the most. And you can see how traditional instruction did not change, basically significantly, might have changed a small amount. So I've got evidence, and I've got an evidence from a figure, I've got evidence in a table, and I don't let them just stand on their own. I call out what is important in the paragraph. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a different way of doing things, slightly different. This is an evaluation report, and that I did with a colleague of mine about an environmental education institute. So you can see here that this first thing I want to show you, first of all, has a research question attached to it. Okay, what professional development experiences did teachers have? But this is merely a descriptive portrayal of numbers, right? So it's just descriptive. It literally is how many hours, all right? Now, notice that in the text, it says, first, it directs people's attention to the figure, and it defines what the scale is. 0 hours is 1, 1 to 5 is 2, etc. Right? Because they may look at this figure and go, oh, well, they had 1 hour of professional development. You know, they had 2 hours of professional development, but up there it explains that's not the case. Then these show, I use colors to show a difference between 2015 and 2016, and you can actually see there's a lot going on in the data. So these are folks who are middle or high school, so essentially secondary is in green and elementary is in dark blue, and so you can actually see who has had NGSS PD, who has had Common Core PD, who has had environmental education PD, right? Our secondary has had less Common Core than the elementary, but slightly more NGSS PD, and certainly more environmental education PD than the elementary, right? So there's some things here that I could call out. The other thing that you see is a comparison across years, right? So now you can see the same subject areas broken out and the same kinds of PD broken out. And what I do in the paragraph is call out a little bit about the years. Actually, I'm not sure that I wrote this paragraph, but my colleagues and I. So interestingly, when compared to 2015, the 2016 survey showed a substantive increase in the PD. And then we give a likely reason. This is the claim evidence reasoning part of things. It's likely due to the rollout of NGSS. And then kind of another overarching claim based on the evidence. Teachers in all 3 subject areas had the most experience and training related to Common Core. All right. Now, scrolling down, there is a research question on what components of this program, Learning Landscapes, are being used most consistently, all right? And you can see here, I wanna focus on this figure. Again, in comparison 2015 to 2016, and then there's these different elements, mentoring, field kits, trails, curriculum, etc. All right, and I've made just a pretty basic bar chart with each of these. So then the interpretation, first of all, in this paragraph, an explanation of what's going on in the charts. Teachers were asked to rank the 3 most important elements of this program as a teacher. Their average rankings are in charts 8 and 9, all right? Then we call out a couple of key things. What's overall ranked highest, right? So in 2015, these things are ranked highest and these things are ranked lowest, all right? Because this is an evaluation report, I'm aware of the audience. The audience may want to know what is taking, you know, what are teachers finding most helpful? What are they not finding helpful? All right. And then essentially I'd say in 2016, it's similar, right? In terms of what's highest and what's lowest. So I'm letting the reader know, who is the folks putting on the PD, plus the funders sometimes, that these are the things that are most used so that they can use this information to do things about their PD. Okay, so another thing that this table is showing actual constructs, right? So these are Likert scale constructs. And again, there's a research question: how confident are teachers in their preparation and background? And again, there's a description of the scale, 3 subscales, etc. Now, a lot of this in a research paper would be in your method. So you may not need to have this in your findings, depending on your audience. All right, but in most cases, it's going to be in your, all this stuff's going to be in your methods. But it does need to be in your methods. But here's the explanation. When analyzing the results, the mean rating for each subscale fell towards the middle range, right? So I'm saying, hey, you know, don't read too much into this, right? It all seems sort of around the middle. Then I say, but the highest was engaging students in critical thinking, right? So I'm calling attention to a few things going on in the figure. Okay, so you can look more at that stuff yourself, but just again, maybe a couple of takeaways is don't let, you need figures and tables. You need figures and tables, but don't let them speak for themselves. So you need to have them there. They need to be very clear. They need to have clear coloring and coding. Then pull out the key pieces for a paragraph and explain what you want the reader to pay attention to. And then often you can give evidence in a little bit of evidence in parentheses, but don't go too crazy. You can always point them back to the table. Okay, that is my overview of writing up findings. You can also, of course, use these papers as examples.